Welcome to Sound Speech, where we talk about Christian living, apologetics, and all things theological. I hope you enjoy. What's going on, guys? I'm glad you could join us once again. We're down here in the Sound Speech studios, and this evening I have with me Jason Pierce. You want to say what's up, Jason?
What's up?
Yeah, man. And our topic today, we're going to be talking about evolution. We're going to talk about, is it true? Is it biblical? Are there issues with evolution? And this is something that is not in my wheelhouse. So I'm going to be, Lord willing, I'm going to be learning a lot today. So hopefully you will too. I'll ask right now, Jason, just tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm not claiming to be a scientist or an expert on this, but
Yeah.
but I am a bit. I'm interested in it, and I've taught myself a little bit about it, and the reason being, I was raised a Christian, but I became very agnostic in my in my 20s, and evolution was a big problem for me.
Yeah.
It I had biology classes and things where it was taught as a fact, and I thought, it is a fact, and how can I trust in biblical inerrancy if evolution is true? And I came to know Jesus. The Spirit drew, or God drew me, and the Spirit used apologetics as a way to draw me. This isn't so much an apologia or a defense. It's more of a polemic. We're kind of going after evolution, but I do believe evolution is a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it is taught far and wide, and there's no like I said, I don't know much about it, but I know it is a theory. They take facts, make assumptions, and a lot of people call it as a fact, but it is very much a theory. So we're talking about evolution. Maybe just ask you to give us a definition. What is evolution? Okay. What are we talking about when we say evolution? Well,
first let me say this: there's a lot of dispute over this, and it's J.P. Moreland. He calls it he says it's an accordion word. It can be used in a lot of different ways. Richard Dawkins, he says it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. Now, Thomas Nagel is probably one of the greatest minds of the century. He's an atheist philosopher, though. He's atheist too, and this is what he has to say about evolution. Whatever one might think about the possibility of a designer, the prevailing doctrine that the appearance of life from dead matter and its evolution through accidental mutation and natural selection to its present forms has involved nothing but the operation of physical law cannot be regarded as unassailable. It is an assumption govern the scientific project rather than a well-conformed scientific hypothesis. Now, that's an atheist. That's Thomas Nagel.
Yeah.
Now, evolution can mean basically three different things. It can mean change over time.
Yeah.
This is accepted by pretty much everyone. Change over time is not disputable. It's something we all see. We see, dogs. Darwin observed the finch beaks. We have different color skins. Darker skin in humans. That's what we call microevolution, and we'll get into that probably a little bit more in a minute. But the second definition of evolution is common ancestry, and this is the idea that we all came from a common ancestor, basically. That you can take all animal life back to a single-celled organism somewhere back in time, and when we all evolved from that. Now, there are some evidence for this, but most of the evidence that you can use for common ancestry is also just as good evidence for design.
Okay.
And that's something we'll get into a little more. Now, let me say something about this. If common ancestry, if this second definition of evolution were true, would this mean that Christianity was false? No. No. This would not. This may cause me to have to tweak my interpretation of Genesis a little bit. I may have to look at the way I'd been reading Genesis. But even if common ancestry, if this form of evolution, this definition of evolution, if it were found to be true, we would still have a lot of good reasons to believe in the Christian and in the Christian worldview.
Yeah, and I guess I'll say there, like I was even saying before we turned it on, I'm a hardcore Bible dude, and I would even say, don't know a ton about a lot of this, but even the way I read the text, I don't think it'll ever be brought about to be true.
No, I don't either. I don't believe. I'm not saying I don't
you're
believe
saying
common
if it
ancestry.
did.
I'm saying
Yeah.
if it did, then
Yeah.
then it still wouldn't disprove Christianity.
I hear you.
Now the third definition is a problem, and when it's the blind watchmaker theory, and this form of evolution, it's the form that most people are referring to when they're speaking of evolution in a controversial sense, and it leaves no room for the Creator. It suggests that all life as we know it developed from a common ancestor also, but by completely undirected means. It suggests that life arose randomly and evolved through natural selection. This is kind of the Darwinian. That's a little bit disputed, but this is the Darwinian theory, pretty much, when people talk about it. It cannot be true if Christianity is true.
Yeah.
And so the first definition, change over time, it's empirically verifiable, and it's not in dispute.
Yeah.
This is not in dispute.
Yep.
The second definition, common ancestry, it has some evidence, but that evidence, I think, is equally just as good, well used for design as it is for common ancestry.
Yeah.
And the third definition, the blind watchmaker theory, it has, and this is a pretty bold statement, but it has no evidence. There is no evidence to back it.
Yeah.
You'll see people say it's a fact, but it's not, and we're going to get into that and talk a little bit more about that.
Well, good deal. You brought up a second ago talking about finch beaks, and I've got here in front of me some things that you've written on this, pretty in depth. But see here, could you just talk maybe a little bit on pepper moths, the finches, and what you were talking about earlier, the differences between dog breeds and how all this works in?
Okay, well, when we talk about these things, the different dog breeds, people look at that and say, well, look, there's evolution right before your eyes, or human skin color. The melanin and human skin, it protects us from harmful UV rays, and people that come from geographical areas closer to the equator, they have a different color melanin, and they have a darker skin. And people would say this is evolution, and it is. It is evolution, but it's what's called microevolution. Microevolution, like I said earlier, is uncontroversial. It's well documented, and it's a naturally occurring biological phenomenon. And not to get too technical, but we're gonna have to a little bit. What microevolution is it's the process whereby pre-existing genetic information is rearranged, corrupted, or lost through sexual reproduction or genetic mutation.
Okay.
So what Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands, the finch beaks, this would be an example of microevolution, not macroevolution, which is promoted by the Darwinists and is a bit more complicated. Now, here's the thing about macroevolution. It requires the introduction of new genetic information. It's believed to be produced. It's believed to produce large scale macro changes, and people see this microevolution and they say, look, that points to evolution.
Yeah.
But what microevolution is suggesting is the rearranging of these pre-existing genes.
Yeah.
But an amphibian evolving into a reptile, or a reptile into a bird, would be it would need the addition of new genetic material.
Yeah. Yeah.
Darwin didn't have all of the information we have about biology today. To Darwin, the cell was kind of an enigma. They thought it was kind of just a blob with this life-giving material. They didn't have the microscopes like we have.
Didn't he say something about talking a little bit over my head here, but didn't he say something about looking into a cell, calling it the black box? If we could just look into it, we could.
He might have had a quote. Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, and that's what the book was about. And we're even going to, I hope we get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
But I think there might have been somewhere where Darwin talked about, what they didn't know about the cell.
Yeah.
And that's what Michael Behe's book was all about, was that their knowledge of the cell was very, very primitive in the time of Darwin. They thought it had this substance in it that was a life-giving substance, and what they didn't understand was the complex machinery, the mountain of information stored in DNA, or the extravagantly intertwined nanotechnology working together to keep the cell functional. Origin of Species was written in 1859, and for almost 100 years, scientists could rest assured that they had solved this problem of human life. In 1953, then Crick and James Watson discovered the molecular structure of DNA, and the amazing complexity in the cell is still being uncovered today. There's still a lot that's they're uncovered. It's an amazing thing. But the DNA is a long string of nucleotides that form.
I'm learning a lot, man. This is
all right. It's a long string of nucleotides that form a 4-character language. A, G, C, and T. Adenine, guanine. I'm gonna end up cytosine and thymine.
You can just say something,
anyway,
and I'd take it because I have.
I don't think I got that right, but it's A, G, C, and T.
Okay,
it's a basic language, and we see this all the time in the DNA structure. Bill Gates once said about DNA, he said it's like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created. It's a language. It's like binary code in your computer, but it's a 4-character language, the A, G, C, and T, along the chain of the DNA. But according to the Darwinists, the organism mutates, or it changes when these nucleotides are rearranged. See, these nucleotides are what are read to create proteins and things that the cell needs. They provide the information for the things the cell needs. According to the Darwinists, when these things are rearranged, like rearranging the letters in a sentence to make a new one, natural selection or survival of the fittest takes over. And if the mutation is beneficial, like for instance, if you take brown rabbits and a few white rabbits and you put them all out in the Arctic, and pretty soon you'll have all white rabbits because the brown rabbits will be easily picked off by the wolves and the foxes, right? Yeah. That's natural selection in a nutshell. But when it takes over, they believe that the mutations, that are beneficial to the organism will thrive and pass down the new mutations. But to get, like I said earlier, from simple to complex, from single cell to human, new genetic information must be added.
Yeah.
Mutations can't account for the addition of information in the DNA.
That's good, man.
That's not a mechanism that will add the information.
Yeah.
They only reorganize the pre-existent stuff. To get in, there's two main ways that they are organized. Point mutation and genetic duplication. Imagine DNA as a book, and like I said, it's information, so it's a lot like a book, right?
Yeah.
It's a book which describes pretty much everything about the organism, like the number of digits, or the hair color, or the kind of eyes it possesses, or how large its brain is, even if it's a vertebrate or not. DNA is like a book about you, basically, our DNA. Now take this book and randomly go to any page and scramble some of the words. Now, this is point mutation. In a few instances, this may cause a beneficial adaptation for natural selection to capitalize on, like larger finch beaks. But most of the time, it will make absolutely no sense of the information, and it will cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
And actually, it's disputable whether there's ever been any beneficial adaptations observed through these mechanisms. But that's point mutation, basically. Now, genetic duplication is it's a bit more dramatic, and let's say your book has 300 pages, right? In it describes who you are, like we said. We take pages 21 through 27, and we paste them between pages 69 and 70. We have made the DNA 7 pages longer now, right?
Yeah.
And now we have 307 pages. But, all right, let's put it this way. I have 3 questions regarding this. Does genetic duplication increase the information content? Does the genetic duplication increase the information content? And does the genetic information duplication increase the information content? Now you're looking at me like, now did I ask anything different from those 3 questions? Did asking the same question more than once convey any added information supplied to the question?
No.
Obviously not. No, it didn't. It didn't supply any added information.
Yeah.
So the mere duplication of information doesn't increase the specified information in any way.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Imagine, a builder that has a set of blueprints to build a house, yet they're incomplete. There is some information that is missing to build the desired house. Could the builder copy some of the existing pages of the prints to supply him with the missing information? Would that work? No. That doesn't provide any added information.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is gene duplication, and I wanted to talk about those 2 things because they're brought up a lot, and I did make the statement that there is no known mechanism that that would that we know that could add information.
Yeah.
And for macro evolution to work, there has to be information added somewhere
Gotcha.
down the line
Yeah.
to move from an amoeba to a human.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
that you got to have added information somewhere, and a lot of it. You know, but that being said, microevolution isn't macroevolution.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, the peppered moss that you asked about,
Yeah.
that was a hoax. That's in a lot of the science books.
Yeah, explain the situation around that.
Jonathan Wales, he wrote a book a few years ago called Icons of Evolution, and he's got a new book called Zombie Science, where he basically added some more information to Icons of Evolution. But in his book, this Icons of Evolution book by Jonathan Wales, and I'm going to be dropping a lot of names because I'm not the expert. These guys are the experts.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to be dropping a lot of names. Like I said, it changed the textbooks because they had a lot of skewed data and biased information, and Jonathan Wales tackled these things, and Icons of Evolution was huge because these peppered moss, for instance, they were provided in science textbooks all over the world, and they as evidence for evolution, and the idea was this, that during the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot more smog in the atmosphere, and the tree trunks began to get darker, and the moss went from a light colored to a dark colored to camouflage themselves so predators wouldn't be able to pick them off the tree trunks.
Yeah.
But there was a huge problem with this. Pepper moss don't normally rest on tree trunks, and the pepper moss that they took pictures of and put in all the science books were pinned or glued up on the tree trunks to help make the point.
Really?
So,
Really?
Yeah. And Jonathan Wales does a really fascinating job with this and a lot of other things in his book. And the finch beaks. You asked about the finch beaks. The finch beaks is they're what Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands, and they gave the evidence. You see, evolution wasn't a new theory. Charles Darwin didn't invent it. What he did do was provide evidence, and no one had done that yet.
Okay.
And it was the finch beaks was.
You talking about the beaks of
the
a
size,
finch?
the size of what he observed was on the Galapagos Islands.
Mm-hmm.
The finches, they would have different sized beaks.
Okay.
And what he observed was that in times of famine or heavy rain, that these beaks would evolve to help them adapt to the situation they were in. The problem with that, and what isn't mentioned a lot is that these finch beaks oscillated in size. They would maybe grow larger, but when the famine was over, they would go right back to where they were.
Okay.
So this didn't point to macro evolution because
it was a fluctuation.
It was a fluctuation,
in
exactly.
adapting to the environment.
Adapting to the environment. Now, if the finches were going to evolve into something different other than the bird, they wouldn't be able to fluctuate. They couldn't fluctuate. They would have to stay like they were and make additional changes on top of that.
Yes.
So the finch beaks were, and this is another thing that he talks that Jonathan Wells tackles is, have you ever heard of the junk DNA? They say that there's a lot of DNA that is used to say that a lot of DNA was junk DNA. A major part of our DNA had no function, and they said that this was evidence for the for evolution. That a lot of our DNA had been disregarded over time because it was no longer useful. And there was a small part of our DNA structure that we actually use now. And all this junk DNA was evidence for for us evolving.
Okay.
And I want to tell you, the junk DNA, that really dinged my faith at a young age. I remember
Really?
reading about
Okay.
it, and the junk DNA. I thought that just that doesn't make any sense. I don't see how a large percentage of our DNA structure would actually be junk if we didn't evolve.
Yeah.
But that also turned out to be not true.
Really?
What they have found is that junk DNA, there is no junk DNA. As our knowledge of DNA has developed, they have found that it is far from junk, that it has many functions, such as regulating DNA replication, regulating transcription on RNA, marking sites for rearrangement of genetic material, or influencing the proper folding and maintenance of chromosomes. And the list goes on and on and on. RNA processing, editing and splicing, modulating. They found a lot of functions that this junk DNA actually has now, so-called junk DNA. So that's outdated, and that's no longer that's no longer presentable as evidence for evolution or macro evolution. And there's a lot of other things that Wells covers in his books that are really interesting. But
Okay. Well, so far we can see, and I can look from a biblical worldview. I can see a beautiful, all-wise creator that makes creatures, animals, living beings, and then gives them the ability to adapt to their
Exactly.
environment. It's the I can see the wisdom of God in that. But what would you say to somebody that would, that's the micro evolution, the changing, the creature changing and adapting to its environment. But what would you say to someone who says, well, hey, given more time, if we could observe this, given more time, wouldn't micro evolution become macro evolution on a
yeah, a lot of people think that you just add time into the recipe, and that makes it happen. Add millions or billions of years, and micro will become macro. Let's put this in perspective first. There's a well-known argument, an atheist argument, that given enough time, a monkey typing random letters on a typewriter would type the Shakespearean play Hamlet.
yeah.
You've heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in his book, Dr. John Lennox, God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? Awesome book. If you haven't read it, man, it's great. But he cites mathematician Russell Griggs' calculations that if a monkey types one key at random per second, the average time to produce the word "the" is 34.72 hours. Now, to produce something as long as the 23rd Psalm, which is a short Hebrew poem made up of about 603 letters and spaces, it would take on average, get this, this is a huge number, 10 to the 1017th power. That is one with 1017 zeros behind it.
Yeah.
That is huge. Let's put this number in a bit of perspective. Now, scientists currently think, and this is off the top of my head, so I might be a little bit wrong about this, but they currently think the universe is, I think, something like 20 million light years across or something like that. It may be more or less. I don't know, but universe is huge, right? We know that now. We've observed galaxies with millions and billions of stars way far off.
Yeah.
The protons, not even the atoms, the micro, the protons, electrons, and the neutrons in the atom. there are 10 to the 80th power in the entire universe. 10 to the 80th. Now,
Yeah.
10, that's in all the stars, all through space, protons, neutrons, electrons are 10 to the 80th. We're talking about 10 to the 1017th power. That number is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But we can see the impossibility of a purely random process being able to account for the origin of complex information-laden systems.
The faith that is required
Exactly.
to believe in that is
Exactly.
unreal to yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Frank Turek and Norm Geisler in the book "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," they have a really good quote. They say to believe that the perfect sequencing of DNA happened by purely random natural processes is like believing the Library of Congress occurred from an explosion in a printing press.
And it really, I mean, it really would be.
Yeah.
It's very, very inconceivable.
It is. Now, Richard Dawkins will argue that evolution isn't undirected, nor left up to chance. And he would say that the natural selection directs the process, and therefore chance has nothing to do with it. Now, I would agree with him that the mechanism of natural selection isn't random.
Yeah.
And that it is a directing force. Natural selection is a real thing. I'm not denying that.
Yeah.
Yet the mutations from which natural selection chooses are random. So the whole process can be nothing but random.
Yeah.
Because the mutations, are random in his worldview.
Yeah.
If the process, if the whole thing, if everything is undirected. So for the materialists to argue that evolution isn't random, I just can't see that. There's no way, if there's not a designer, that it can't be random. Now, humans and apes, they differ at about 150 different nucleotide positions. 150 million, different nucleotide positions.
I'm not gonna act like I know what that means. But
Well, we talked earlier about the DNA and the A, T, G, and C, the nucleotides, and how those are the 4-character code, like the binary code in a computer.
Yeah.
It's a language. It's a digital code.
Okay, gotcha.
On 150 million of these nucleotide positions, we differ from apes.
Okay.
So is it all coming together?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm learning, brother. I'm learning.
I am too. I'm constantly learning about this, and there's so much that we still have to learn about it. But the rate of spontaneous mutations from humans for humans is about 1 to 2 mutations per generation.
Okay.
Right? Now, the evolutionists would claim 6 million years, I think, for the split from chimpanzee lineage to the humans, from the split from the chimpanzee to the humans. This doesn't add up. There's not near enough time for humans to evolve from an ape, much less from a single-celled organism.
Yeah.
So the question that, given enough time, would this not cause macroevolution to would this not be good evidence that macroevolution could happen? It's still not enough time. Okay, this just doesn't add up. There's not enough time. If you think about it, 150 million different nucleotide positions and 1 to 2 mutations per generation. Now, there's a little bit of argument over how long a generation is. The biblical generation is 40 years. I've heard as few as 25. Let's say 30 years. If you had 2 mutations per generation, on 150 million different nucleotides over a 30-year period. I think that would be something like 4.5 million. Yeah, 4.5 million years for the split. And they say 6.6 million years for the split between chimpanzees and humans. So you say, well, yeah, see there's enough time, but that's assuming that each mutation is beneficial. Mutations can be hereditary or developed, but they're never are they hardly ever good.
Yeah.
Cancer, Huntington's disease, cystic fibrosis, single cell anemia, Tay Sachs, color blindness. This is what mutations gets us.
Yeah.
We don't we hardly ever, or I don't. It's disputable that we've ever observed a actually beneficial mutation. Most mutations are neutral, some are deadly, and it's arguable that any have been observed to be beneficial. So to believe that each mutation was a beneficial mutation and through those 150 million, that's a stretch.
Yeah.
That's a stretch.
That phone going off there.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah,
but I was right at the end.
I hear you. Well,
I thought I'd silence that.
I know. I've heard you say before that possibly some Darwinists would bring up the complaint, like we're saying we don't observe. We observe microevolution, but we don't observe macroevolution. And they would, you've said before that they bring up the accusation. Well, it happens over such a large period of time, this macroevolution, that it's unfair to criticize it because you can't observe it because it happens over such a long period of time.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
What would you?
Well, there's been some experiments done on this. Pierre Grasset of Paris, he was one of the first to push genetic mutation and natural selection to the limits to see what it was capable of. To see mutations change organisms to new organisms, like you said, would be impossible in, say, humans or dogs who have lifespans, that are a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. But lifespans, he used was fruit flies who have a lifespan of about 14 days.
Yeah.
And he was able to breed about 1,000 generations, and the last of which remain fruit flies. And what he actually observed was that something called a phenomenon called genetic homeostasis.
Genetic homeostasis.
Basically, it's a lot simpler than it sounds. Through selective breeding and pushing these mutations to the limits, he hit a barrier. Okay. And that's what genetic homeostasis is.
Okay.
There seems to be a barrier between species lines. His conclusion was that if thousands of generations of intense selective breeding couldn't produce different species, then it would be very hard for natural selection alone. Now, if that weren't enough, more recently, E. coli has been put to the test. And they have tested about 60,000 generations of E. coli bacterium. This is equivalent to about 2 million human years. And the results weren't good for Darwin's theory there either. The E. coli showed some marginal variances, but it actually began throwing away some very important molecular machinery. The lesson learned that it's easier for evolution to break things than to make things.
Yes.
And instead of evolving, bacteria devolved, and 60,000 generations of E. coli bacteria begets E. coli bacteria.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know some Darwinists give evidences for macroevolution, and one of their evidences is the similarities in bone structures. That there are a lot of similarities there. What we had to say in regards to that?
Yeah, they'll talk about similarities in different animals, but there's kind of a picture that's in a lot of the science textbooks and stuff, and a lot of people may remember seeing it, where it shows a bat wing and a whale flipper and a human arm, and it's comparing the bone structure, and this is presented as evidence for common descent. And if you'll remember when we talked about definitions for evolution, I said that most evidence for common descent is also evidence for design.
Yeah.
This is part of what I had in mind when I said that. It gets tossed around a lot, and it can seem to be pretty convincing evidence for common descent, but it's just as convincing that the similarities in design indicate a common designer. Why would the basic design found to be acceptable in one animal not be similarly applicable into another animal? I mean,
yeah.
It would seem pretty natural or pretty reasonable that we should all have, a lot of similarities in our structure. So I think it points to a common designer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I tell you, on that right there, we're pushing right at about 40 minutes, and there's a lot more that I'd like to ask you about this. And so I'd like to have you back down here for a part 2.
That'd be great.
And I think we got I get about 40 more minutes of questions to ask you. And man, I've really enjoyed this, and I can say, man, just looking at the beauty that Yahweh God has created and set this world up, and the wisdom that He has in creating and sustaining all of this, it's amazing the lengths that people will go in believing a lot of far-fetched stuff to deny this beautiful creator, this beautiful God. And I can definitely say I do not believe whatever scientific discoveries come up in the future, whatever may come, I am not afraid to. I don't know much about science, but I believe the Word of God. I do believe that God is wise. Well, I don't think as Christians we don't have to be scared of science. We don't have to.
God created it.
Yeah, it's not. It is definitely not. Well, are you going to have faith in God, or are you going to believe science?
No.
They're very much compatible, and all truth is God's truth. And I do believe that the Word of God will stand the test of time, and no matter how much the nations rage or Dawkins and everybody else just foams at the mouth and does not like the Lord, the truth will stand. That could probably be said in better ways, but I'll let you kind of close out and give some.
Yeah. I like what you said there. Science and Christianity are not at odds at all. We're not to be afraid of it. God created nature, and science is a study of nature.
Yes.
So they're not going to contradict.
Yes.
And when we look at evolution and we really break it down and we really get into the specifics of it, and we go at it with an open mind, and I think that's something that I was able to do a few years back, was go at it with an open mind. That's hard to do a lot of times.
Yeah.
But I think what the conclusion that you must come to when you go at it with an open mind and you really look at all the evidences is that it takes more faith to believe it than it does to disbelieve it.
Yeah.
Or at least the the blind watchmaker theory. It takes way more faith
Yes,
to believe that.
and we have not even gotten into. I, I hate to the best way I can say it, just the real nonsense of a giant bang that happened from nothing, and there's probably a better way to put that, but if you go back where I look, if you go back, something is eternal. You've got to have something that is eternal, whether a naturalistic materialist would say, well, matter is eternal. Something's got to be eternal, and we, within the Christian worldview, say yes, and his name is he is Yahweh God, one in essence, three in person. He is a loving, faithful designer.
Right. Yeah. Praise God.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, like I said, this is part one. We'll come back for part two. And if you guys have stuck with us this long, very, very much appreciate it. If you like what you heard, you can like it there on Facebook, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we will see you guys next time.